Second Baptist Church in
Okay.
Arkansas. I got baptized in Lake Nixon, and when the pastor baptized me, he lost his grip on me. So he's trying to pull me up, but he's really just holding me under. And I just remember going like, I didn't know I was meeting Jesus today. Like, I was like, I've misunderstood this entire thing. Like, then part of me is like, my mom paid him off. Like, I know what's
That's
happening.
awesome.
Yeah,
You know,
ringing it out
chubby
of you.
7-year-old dies, Lake Nixon meets Jesus.
But he was ready.
Oh yeah,
He was ready. That's right.
Oh yeah,
He was ready.
yeah. Terry Tiger Elementary, Joe T. Robinson. Yeah, this is my old. This is
That's
right.
awesome.
This is where I was built, right? So, so it's neat. It's neat to be back here.
That's awesome.
So we've got to throw in our thank yous before we officially get started, and they can edit all that in. But just thank the governor for giving us the opportunity to serve in these positions.
Yeah.
The door opened for this season in our lives, and we got to walk through it. What a privilege. Our Attorney General for funding the build-out of this podcast, allowing us to be able to do this today. And then we missed him. He was in and out. Colonel Hager came in to say hello, but his leadership for the Department of Public Safety has just been phenomenal.
Yes.
And, again, all of that combined has led us to be here today. Extremely proud to have the mythological figure.
Man, the colonel popped out quick. He popped in here and he sensed the potential to get dumber just by hanging out with me.
Well, and I
He's
say
like, man,
I say mythological
he's like, I can
because
see.
every officer in the state of Arkansas has heard a Clint story.
That's
I
true.
mean, anywhere we go,
That's
your name
true.
is brought up.
That's terrifying. That's
It
like
is. It is. So we brought you today.
It's not associated with like any active warrants or anything.
No,
like
no
that,
active
right?
warrants. I did check before.
Statute of
ran 51
limitations
before we
is
got in
in
here.
theory over, isn't it?
But we have, I tell you all the time, we borrow, steal, acquire your material.
I love it. Yeah, it's
half of our
humbling.
leadership program is built around things that we have learned from you. You are a mentor to me, you know that. But seriously, we had to bring you in and get you on tape because people were starting to question us.
Yeah.
Who is this Clint
this
guy?
Clint Bruce guy.
I mean, he's
Like,
bigger than life.
Yeah.
And so we're happy to have you here today. We really want to have a conversation with you today about leadership, how you've developed the team that you've developed, what you've learned in your career, wellness and resiliency.
Yeah.
Because what we have found working with Chris and the team is that they all three go hand in hand. And law enforcement is unique in the fact that we've got to do this 30 years. And if we're not pouring back into ourselves and taking care of one another, Clint, we've had 5 suicides in the state of Arkansas this year in the law enforcement family.
Yeah.
And it's just, we're passionate about it, and we don't want to just talk doom and gloom. That's not what we're here today, but that's our purpose.
But we got to talk about the things, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, the inherent risk of being a protector is gonna bring with it the potential for loss, right? But when we lose someone to a non-kinetic, it's still a combat loss, but it's a combat loss we hopefully could have done something about. And I think the very first thing you do is you got to talk about it. Like when it started happening within the military community, one of the first things we did in the most elite units was started talking about it. And I tell people all the time, like, I don't know how to talk about it well. I just know not talking about it isn't going to help, right? Yeah. And I've lost almost as many of my friends to suicide as I have to combat and training. And,
wow.
And as a member of the special operations community, and then coming out of the elite athletic world too. I mean, the phenomenon of suicide within the athletic world is real too. And I'm not equating this profession with that profession, but I think sometimes you have this consummate identity and performance and how you define yourself and the value you place on yourself, and then the compromises that happen to that in your own mind. It's we have to get those invisible scars on the surface so we can talk about them and point them out for what they are, which is a lie, right? And I tell people all the time that, I think most good people want to count. This is my story. I think most good people want to count more than they cost. And there's a moment where you may feel like you are costing more than you count. And when you feel that way, this virtuous part of you will reemerge, but it'll lie to you and it'll tell you, maybe everybody would be better if I stopped costing so much. And that's when that internal conversation has to stop. Yeah. And I tell my friends all the time, it's like, hey man, you can ask yourself, if I'd be better off without you, but you can't answer it. That's my question to answer. You can't answer that for me. And the answer is no, I'm never going to be better without you, right? So all these pains are temporary. All these afflictions are fleeting. And that's why I think wellness is a precursor to that, because, you have a bad night with drinking and then all of a sudden you make that decision you don't come back from. So hey, listen, everybody knows this. How do you beat an ambush? You fight your way into it. So you run at the hard things, right? And this is a hard thing. And what the warrior class knows how to do is run straight at the hard things, because hard things flinch when you do that.
Wow. I don't ever want to compare what the four of us felt last week compared to the agencies that had to deal with that. But knowing our passion to pour into our officers across the state, I mean, it's a gut check, And for the first time, starting my 30th year in the profession, and I think I really thought about this last week. When have we had more officers take their own lives versus losing them in the line of duty to the bad guys? And I can't remember a time in my career where that number's been switched, and it scares me. And I worry for the agencies. I worry how they deal with it. We know we've been in contact with them, but it's a passion of ours, not just from the leadership standpoint, but the resiliency. How do we just keep pouring into these men and women where we can hire them and retire them?
Yeah.
So, but anyway, on to some other things. So, we met Chris about 18 months ago.
Yes, sir.
Going on 2 years ago, and just I actually gave his son his diploma. His son was a graduating law enforcement officer, so I gave him his diploma, his certificate, and we built a friendship and a relationship out of there. And you kind of want to talk about what we've built, and what we want you to do today, honestly, is validate what we're doing.
Sure.
That's what we want,
that's
sir.
Why you're here.
Yeah, that's why you're here, sir. Pour into us. But go ahead.
Well, we did. The story is I got a phone call. I was working on my dissertation. So it was burnout in law enforcement, clergy, and physicians in Arkansas and Texas.
Yeah.
So we're looking at all three helping professions, different facets. And during that study, I got a phone call from the secretary then and said, hey, we're having challenges with recruiting and retaining, resiliency issues. Would you come meet with us? And it was a Tuesday. I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, I said, when do you want me there? She goes, how's Thursday look? So I got down here really quick.
Yeah.
And we began to meet. And so that started another study. So we studied the officers statewide, and we sent out 14,000 emails, received about 1,400 back.
Yeah.
And the end result was we found out about 10% or 15% were dealing with some level of burnout.
Sure.
In law enforcement in Arkansas. And so that continued the dissertation, but we found what kept surfacing was the link between leadership, quality, and resiliency and wellness. Regardless of whether it was law enforcement, physicians, or clergy, there was that link.
Right.
And the stronger the leadership, the more resilient, the healthier the teams were. And so that's how ultimately ended up here. We started talking about leadership development and training, recognized there might be a lack in the state.
Yeah.
And they said, write your job description. And so that's where I got these brothers that are family now. And so we've been teaching at the academy level all the way up. And the colonel has said that if you're going to be promoted within the state of Arkansas now, you're going through these leadership classes.
Well, listen, I mean, I think you have to. I think there's there's tactical leadership, and then there's strategic leadership, and there's neck down leadership, and there's neck up leadership. And,
Sure.
And what I've always taught my girls, and I always if I tell my girls it, I'll tell anybody it. And and I brought to my girls the best that the ball field and the battlefield taught me, right? And the way I've always said it to them is the human machine really has four performance systems. You're the body, the brain, the mind, and the soul. And from an analogy perspective, and this isn't scientific, this is just me distilling everything I've learned along the way as I've tried to become this ever better version of myself, this like constant work that I am, and we all should view ourselves as this constant, persistent effort. The body's a car, the brain is a steering wheel, the mind is a driver, and the soul is this inherent sense of destination and destiny where you want to be. Fundamentally, the body and the brain are just machines. And what we learned, the arc of my story, being a college football player and a briefly professional football player, then in the special operations community, which is a tactical athlete, is in the late 90s, early 2000s, some of the best performance scientists started paying attention to neck up performance as much as they were the neck down. And the minute that happened, or the minute we looked at those phases, those performance elements, what we realized is, without even intending it, you look at NASCAR, we were doing all this stuff but never changing the tires. We're doing all these things to the driver, but we weren't changing the engine. And the hardware requires maintenance just like the software does, right? Wow. And when you look at the human machine as a machine, and you begin to steward each one of those, you begin to see some really, really significant events, right? Some evolutions, right? So servicing, listen, the whole officer protects, right? And if the whole officer protects, then the whole officer needs to be serviced and needs to be treated, needs to be cared for, needs to be built into, right? And, wow. We had these, I went on the board of this thing called the Center for Brain Health, the Brain Performance Institute, because I needed it. I needed to figure out what's going on with my brain with my injuries. And for me, I think my gift is not being gifted. And because, I joke, there's probably a lot of people have heard me say this before. I joke, I call myself the achieving average, but I'm not an average achiever. It's like a little bit of a play on words. When I say I'm an achieving average, what I mean, if you were to aggregate all my gifts and abilities, you'd find me to be a high C or a low B in just about everything except for looks. I'm a good-looking guy. Like, I get it. I know y'all have been like, that's a handsome man. Like, I know. Like, I was leaving the house this morning. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, and I turned to look at my bride, and I said, hey, babe, I can turn it down, but I can't turn it off. And she laughed too, which is pretty hurtful, right? But because, I was the fifth string fullback in 8th grade, and there were 3 other fullbacks. So, do the math on that one, right? And my dad, he's like, son, I'm not embarrassed you're the fifth string fullback. I'm embarrassed that they put it in the program. I'm like, they put it in the program? Like 1, 2, 3, blank, 5, Clint Bruce. And so for me, I've always had to figure out a system. I've always had to have a system, right? And so for me, understanding the system of sustained performance and being just a knowledge carnivore and recognizing that I don't have margin to just show up. So I've got to give myself every advantage. I got to find all the angles I can. I got to run with great allies, and I got to maximize my. I remember I wrote this down when I was about in 8th grade when I was a fifth string fullback. I wrote this equation, and I've always called it the achievement equation. And it's angles plus allies plus advantages equals an achievement, right? And angles are a craft. Like, we get in the shoot house, we're reducing inefficiencies, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Nature's an incredible instructor. Like, a lion looks lazy till it's being a lion. And they're like, oh. And what apex predators are is they're masterful optimizers. So an apex predator, a shark looks lazy till it's being a shark. A lion looks lazy till it's being a lion. And what they're doing is they're harvesting energy. Because what all apex predators know is they're going to have to ascend into this perfect version of who and what they are, and they never know when. They never know when they're going to have to ascend into this apex predator version of themselves. And they're going to have to ascend into this version of themselves to protect their pride or take their prey. And so they're extremely intentional about energy distribution. Like, the brain consumes more calories than any other part of the body when it goes to work, right? When it's in full aggression mode, it is a calorie hog, right? And so when you see, so optimizing for me has always been a big deal. Like, I can't spend as much as you because it's going to cost me more than you when we start fighting. And and I think that was always part of what I did, not because I was forward thinking or anything, but it was more out of necessity than anything else, right? I just knew I didn't have the margin to outperform more talented guys than me, so I had to miss less. Like if I miss less, I don't have to carry as much when we start fighting. And then because I didn't have to carry as much, I'm not as tired as you are. So what are these performance advantages? And so for me, viewing myself as, car, steering wheel, driver, it's just the way I've had to take care of myself. And for the life I've led at 50, I'm fairly intact, and I think certainly I've been blessed, and God's been very gentle with me. But I also think my disadvantages have advantaged me over the long run, wow. And it created a system that has allowed me to perform at a high level for longer than you'd think I could. But it's intentional. It's a design thing.
It's interesting when I hear you say, if I heard you right, and so correct me if I didn't, but we focus a lot on the the head or below the neck. And now it's more of we got to do both. We don't neglect that.
You do all of it.
But you got to do up here.
The mind can impose its will on the body and brain for a little while, but not over long periods of time. Right. And you know, and so we have to service all three of those parts. So if we look at ourselves as like, let's use the NASCAR analogy. Every part of that NASCAR, of that racing system. So if we look at the car and the driver as a racing system, when that thing comes in the pit, every part of that racing system is treated. The driver's treated, the steering wheel is treated, the tires are treated, and that's what performance really is. And so for us to continue that analogy, if all we did when we pitted was change the tires, but we didn't refuel, you know, we didn't get the driver cold water, you didn't service the cooling system inside that, and it would degrade over time, right? I have this. I don't think you've heard me talk about this, but I have this kind of theory called championing, right? You put an ing on the end of anything, you just made it a verb. Like, you know,
Gotcha.
So my wife says there's this thing called Clinting, and it's not nearly as cool as I thought it was. It's like it's like everything just going into a state of total disarray. I'm like, that's called entropy. That's not the same thing. But for me, championing is when you're producing championships over and over again. And this guy's been fortunate to be a part of systems that have won a lot. I had to take notes. Like I said, I'm always trying to figure it out and learn from others. And God's been very gentle with me in that I've been around some amazing people. But the way I say it is all elite organizations, elite champions, the people that are producing championships in their craft, whatever it is, there's always four qualities. There's passion, there's talent, there's precision, and there's endurance. The higher up you go, the less passion and talent matter. And it's not because they don't matter, it's just everybody's got it. At the Olympics, everybody's got passion and talent. In the NFL, everybody's got passion and talent. So that's not going to be the differentiator. The differentiator is precision and endurance. And I have maybe a different view on precision than some people. For me, precision isn't being right more. Precision is being wrong less. I think that's a more faithful way to articulate how things really happen, right? Like, I hated it when football, and they go, he gets stronger as the game goes on. Like, no, he doesn't. Nobody gets stronger as the game goes on. He degrades more slowly, you know. And so what you're seeing when you see someone sustain high performance, they're just degrading more slowly because they've mastered their craft, right? And then endurance is being wrong less for longer than your competition. How do I miss less? Like, if you're fighting, you're scared. And because you're scared, you're going to miss. But you got to just miss less, right? And if you miss less, you know, it's an attrition thing at some point in time, right? And so I remember I was with an NFL team, and I don't want to say his name. He wouldn't have any issues with it. I haven't asked him, so I'm real respectful of that. But he's an insatiably curious head coach, and he's fantastic. He's so fun to be around. He's just like a child. I mean, he's just got this youthful energy to him, and he's won everywhere he's gone. And we were at practice one time, and he goes, "Make no mistakes." And when he did, I kind of flinched, and he sees everything. Like, I don't know how he saw it, but he saw me do it. So we're walking off after practice, and he goes, "Hey, Clint." I said, "Yes, sir." He goes, "When I said make no mistakes, you flinched." I said, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "Why?" I said, "Well, I'm going to answer your question, but it's not apples to apples. I haven't done what you've done. I haven't won national championships and Super Bowls, so I'm just going to answer your question. You can apply it however you want to." And he goes, "Okay." I said, "These guys are geniuses. They're all geniuses. They're all physical geniuses. And more of them are intellectual geniuses than they know, because you can't mass this information then retrieve it and perform under pressure like you do in a game. In the SEAL teams, in the special operations, I was surrounded by genius all the time. All those guys are geniuses. And you rely on genius to evolve the craft. And so the worst thing you do is tell genius to make no mistakes, because you stifle their creativity, right? Genius evolves the craft. If Barry Sanders is your running back, you have two plays. Barry run left, Barry run right, right? You just take notes. You're like, well, no one else could do that. That's a Barry play. And then Barry does something that's like, oh, other guys could do that, so you evolve. And so I said, I would always tell my guys, make new mistakes. Just make new mistakes. When you say make new mistakes, you're giving genius permission to create and to innovate, right? But you're also demanding that it's a pro. So in order to make new mistakes, what do you got to do? You got to know everything about your old ones. And I had a conversation with a pro athlete, and I was talking to him. I said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm trying to figure out what I ate on Tuesday." I said, "What does that mean?" He goes, "Well, I inventory everything I eat from Wednesday on. And in the third quarter of last week's game, I felt sluggish. So it must have been something I ate on Tuesday."
Wow.
That level of inventory, that level of stewardship of what it takes to perform at a high level, that's something you see at the most elite units. You see this strategic awareness of what it takes to not just perform, but perform sustainably. And increasingly and rightly, brain science has been a big part of that.
Wow.
Like there's more capital in like the venture capital world. Mm-hmm. There may be more capital pointed at sleep optimization than any other terrain of human performance. These float labs and how to create asymmetric sleep scenarios. And I don't know about y'all, but sleep's a hard thing for me. Mm-hmm. And that's why I wear all these different things. I wear all these different things because I grew up, you had to get 8 hours of sleep or you're going to be worth anything the next day. Mm-hmm. Well, the reality is 8 hours is a basket inside of which you need to get REM, light, and deep sleep, right? But the real metric is, do you get, so, I mean, I could, if I sleep 5 hours, but I get enough REM, and I'd wake up in the morning, it's like, well, I didn't sleep 8 hours, so it's going to be a bad day because someone told me. Well, that's a guideline, and everybody's unique, and all these wearables that we have right now, like, you know, performer as performance CEO and understanding yourself, it's fascinating and it's an encouraging thing. And that's why I'm so excited. That's why I was driving up here the whole time. And the investment you're making in the law enforcement officer system, which is the whole human and the whole ecosystem, you're doing two things. One, you're showing every officer that they're worth it. I mean, when I was playing at the Naval Academy, in my freshman year, we were sponsored by like Annapolis Tire Care and Mattress Center, you know, and like, you know, Bob's Toupees and just like a booster club kind of thing. And then my sophomore year, we were sponsored by Nike. And the minute we were sponsored by Nike, we felt that we were college football players.
Wow.
And so all the officers watching this, I'm just here to tell you, this amount of time and treasure and talent doesn't get poured into you unless you're seen as worth it.
Right.
And so just know that you're worth it, man, because, I mean, the Olympic system isn't – the Olympics aren't coming to me asking to help me become a better runner. They're just like, it's not worth it. Let's let him lift heavy weights, right? And so the fact that y'all are doing this shows how much the individual officer is worth as a performance system.
That's awesome.
And it's really cool.
You said the 4 areas. Go over those 4 areas again.
The human machine, so passion, talent, precision, and endurance, right? Okay. Precision is being wrong less. That's why we train.
Right.
We train so we can be wrong. You know, like we do it 1,000 times outside of the games. We do it right during the game, right? And then endurance is being wrong less for longer than a competition, because there's a war of attrition between you and evil every time, right? And it's like, who makes less mistakes? And who makes less mistakes for the longest. And that's why servicing the neck up is so important, because this is the driver, right? Mm-hmm. The driver has to impose its will on the body and the brain. And that's one of the things that I was really, really fascinated by when I joined the special operations community. And I didn't not think that was there. It just was really interesting to me how decision-making and performance under stress and sleep and all these things were highly valued the minute I joined the SEAL teams, because they'd begun to recognize that the whole man, the whole woman operates. So you got to service the whole man and the whole woman.
Yeah.
And those which serve them, which are the families.
And you talked a little bit about the soul earlier too.
Yeah.
So how do you service for you? What does that look like?
Well, my faith is a big. I mean, like I don't know if y'all caught this, but I told a story about me getting baptized in Lake Nixon, and now the pastor held me underwater. And I was like, I didn't know I was meeting Jesus today. Like, I've misunderstood this whole thing. And but my faith has always been a part of me, knowing that there is good and evil, and I want to be on the good side and to do my part to advance the good and to reduce the evil. My father died when I was young. And the thing I love about God is God's not scared of any of my hardest questions. He's not disappointed in my anger. That's all Psalms is about, is David just complaining a lot.
True.
And David was his own problem most of the time. Like, you want to feel better about yourself? Read about David.
100%.
Because David's like, these people are trying to kill me and I didn't do anything. You're like, really? Didn't do anything.
If he could step in it, he stepped in it.
Didn't get one of your guys killed and hooked up with his wife, didn't it? Well, yeah.
I guess there's that thing.
Like, so I mean, like, we're in a bad fight. Well, so like, but you still a man after God's own heart, right? But I remember when I lost my dad, I maintained my faith probably as much out of respect for him as having
Wow.
faith, because my dad died loving. My dad died well, and he died loving Jesus.
Wow.
And for me to abandon that faith would have been to say my dad was wrong, and I didn't want to say my dad was wrong.
Wow.
And when I kind of came back to it, God was just still there. He's like, "Are you done?"
Yeah.
I'm like, "Yeah, I'm done."
Yeah.
And so I think that I'm going to say this, and I don't mean to say this casually. When you lose your fear of death in the broader sense, "Oh, death, where's thy sting?" We do not grieve as those without hope grieve. You can begin to live in a way that you can't otherwise, right?
Right.
And I lived that out. I lived that out as the son of a widow, and to watch the persistence of community and watch how my family was loved by my dad's friends.
Wow.
And being that has been real important to me.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that, man.
But we talk about that. I mean,
we do.
We talk about the physical, obviously the physical side of the house, which is neck down, right?
Yeah.
We've done that. That was the way
Hardware, software.
we grew up, right?
It's hardware and software.
the investment in the physical aspect of things.
Right? Well, we were growing up. Remember, like, we were all drinking out of the same PVC pipe at
yeah, water
practice.
hose and
That's
yeah,
100%
Like
true.
E. coli is just running up that PVC pipe. We got it at Home Depot.
Only the strong
There's a dude
survive.
hacking up a lung three holes down from you on the. You just drink if you got the water break, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
Right. Or take the
we're
salt
getting
tabs.
concussions from
Yes.
getting concussions from the hit, and then the whistle in the ear hole after that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a miracle. We're all still here, right?
Yeah, it's true.
And but yeah, I mean, listen, that NASCAR analogy is a good analogy. The whole car races, human included, and we begin to look at ourselves as performance systems. And then I think where faith, and I think you got to have a faith, and we can talk about which faith and all these other things, but a faith, a belief that there is ultimate good to fight towards and fight for. That's what you're pushing towards, and that's what you're trying to create for others, right? But having all four of those systems serviced and checked, right? I mean.
Right.
We for years, and I don't think anybody's doing wrong. And what I'll tell you, war is really only good for three things. One, the reason you go to fight it, right? And as long as that's, hey, fight evil, put evil away. And then there's massive advancements in technology on comms, and there's massive advancements in medicine. And I think because we've been able to image the brain in ways in the last 15 years that we've never been able to image it, we've been able to create these derivative protocols that are only really available to us because of the imagery. So in the 80s and 90s, I don't think our coaches didn't care about us. I don't think you just go with what you know, right?
And it was what we knew at the time.
That's what we knew.
Yeah.
It was new. Hey, you got to stretch. Like, whatever, Cheetah don't stretch. I always say that all the time, like, Clint, you don't stretch, I'm like, Cheetah doesn't stretch. And so probably once a month, someone will send me a picture of a cheetah stretching. I'm like, he's yawning. Totally different things, right? And I stole that from Deion Sanders, which he doesn't need a stretch. But yeah, that's why I love this. I mean, y'all have built an office of total officer performance to include from the neck up and heart out and in.
I think we're forced to, though. I obviously.
Well, if you care, you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so the team, what these guys do every day and what they pour into law enforcement across the state, yes, we're passionate about it, but it's an absolute must.
Yeah.
If you want to win.
Absolutely.
I tell you, the coaches that adopted the total human performance kind of methodology first are the ones that wanted to win the most or have won the most. Those are the ones in the world of strength conditioning. It was interesting. Over the last 20 years, there's been an emergence of a director of human performance in most programs, right? And if you were a strength and conditioning coach that could think beyond the weight room, a lot of time you would fleet up to that director of human performance because you could look at nutrition, you could look at mental health, all this other stuff. If you couldn't, you just stayed in the weight room and you're about to go work for a director of human performance. But I promise you, there is not an elite athletic community that is not focused on nutrition, sleep, mental health, right? One of the first places that built it in was the Olympic Training Center, right? And then when you live in this time, this is where technology is so fascinating, right? Like, to figure out how to optimize the system so you can use the time, you have to recover well. Like the caloric load on an officer while they're on patrol, hyper-vigilant the whole time, right?
That's amazing.
I think if you put an officer under a functional MRI and replicated a traffic stop, you would not be able to discern, because when you look at functional MRIs, it's just a functional, so you don't know who it is. You can disassociate it from the patient. You're just looking at brain activity. You would not be able to discern between a neurosurgeon in the middle of surgery, an elite sniper right before they take their shot, a hedge fund manager making the biggest deal of their life, and an officer walking up on a traffic stop, because of the way the brain works.
Right.
And so you look at the load on that, right? And you know, the first units to put in kind of nutrition and mental health in the special operations communities were our most elite units.
Wow. That tells you
and that tells you something.
Yeah.
Like, whatever, you do yoga, that's dumb. He does yoga. He's a troop commander at SEAL Team 6. Like, I was going to do yoga. Like, I was going to sign up for it. Like, it's dumb. It's dumb that it's not by me is what I meant. I was not doing, because when the cool guys do it, everybody else will do it, right? And reading and all these other things, man. Like, when we realized this war was going to go on for a long time, we started treating the human machine. And I was really fortunate, having been at the Naval Academy. We had this amazing strength coach named Phil Emery. He's legendary to us, and he was one of the first directors of human performance before the term was even coined. Because in the 90s, at service academies, there is no difference between heart, courage, valor between 1s, 2s, and 3s. There is a difference in size, strength, and speed, right? So if second string goes in, you may have even got an upgrade when it came to courage, heart, and valor, but it may be 3 inches shorter and 20 pounds lighter. And Phil knew that our ones had to stay healthy. And so you ask any great strength and conditioning coach right now, they'll tell you, they know what they're doing when they say, my job is to create injury-resistant athletes and make them bigger, faster, and stronger if I can. But injury resistance comes first, right? Because the institutional knowledge you lose when an experienced person rolls off a patrol, that's more than just a man hour. If someone's been an officer for 15 years and they pull their hamstring, that's not 1 man hour you're losing on that patrol. That's 15 years of knowledge. Mm. And so preservation of force and readiness is a big deal.
I think just what spoke to me out of what you just said right then is you talk about losing somebody to injury, and in the physical sense. But in the law enforcement realm where we live, think about the compounding effect of that when you lose somebody to a mental break or a burnout, or that high functioning person who's been living in the hypervigilance world for years and years and years on end, and they are that cool guy. They are that guy that everyone's looked up to. And now they've burned out, like I can't do anymore, and they're gone. Or something drastic happens. And I don't know why, Clem, but that kind of jumped out at me right then.
That's really good.
The compound effect on the situation as a whole from those injuries, and how important it is for the injury resistance to be built in, not just physically.
I was incredibly fortunate because I grew up around. I remember when I was at the Ravens, we all knew Ray Lewis was going to be. That's one of the reasons I left the NFL. Was going to SEAL teams. I remember we did practice one day and watched him do something. I was like, man, it might be easier to become a Navy SEAL than beat out Ray Lewis. And he's just really good. And a lot of people don't know how wide he is. He's just a wide human being. He's incredibly fast, but he was a student of the game. And I was watching Ray commit to his craft, right? And he had this. If you didn't watch as much film at home as you did at the facility, you're not a pro, right? They had these standards, and that's one of the reasons they performed as well. But watching dudes like that stretch, when the best guy is focused on recovery, then everybody else ought to focus on recovery too. Britt Slabinski's Slab, he's a Medal of Honor recipient in the community, and and he walks up to you, he's like, "Hey man, how's your headspace?" And you're like going, "Okay." One of the most revered operators in our community has asked me how my headspace is, which means he thinks about it, which means I probably ought to think about it too. And so when you're alphas, when you're apex predators, focus on recovery and resilience and sustainability, at some point in time, it becomes just the way you do it, Wow. Every NFL team I go to now, it's really interesting. There's less 45-pound plates, and there's more core and resistance and body weight and all these other things, because injury resistance, the best ability is availability, right? And that's what this whole effort is. This whole effort is recognizing that ability, the best ability is availability. So how do we invest in you? How do we pour into you? How do we service body, brain, mind, soul, so you can do what you're uniquely gifted and blessed and able to do in your city, in your municipality, in your agency.
Wow.
So it's interesting. You've mentioned this a couple of times. It's that leadership aspect of let's follow through. You mentioned stretching.
Yeah.
The great stretch. How's your headspace? And I think that's where law enforcement executives, leaders, whether it's the lowest rank or the highest rank, have to look at those that they lead, left and right, front and back, and go, this is important. Leadership's important.
And it has to be a discipline, because you're talking about some of the busiest leaders on the planet.
Sure.
It's not like you have time to hey, let's step back and think about, like, you have to make it programmatic, because when you're in a reactive industry, this is a reactive industry. Like, every time you get a 911 call, you already you're in mitigation, you're not in management. You can do whatever you can to create prevention, but most of the time you're doomed to reaction, right? So it's not like you got a lot of idle time sitting around thinking programs, right? Which I think committing to this office makes this available. So amazing. So, but you got to create a discipline. You got to make it one of the rotations you go through. And I think when I was up here talking to the chiefs, I think it was 3 years ago, someone asked me a question. It was a great question. Like, how do you make sure everyone's headspace is cool? I'm like, well, I do one thing. I go, hey, man, how are you doing? And they tell me, I go, prove it. And it got, what do you mean prove it? I'm like, prove it. Tell me one good thing that's happened on the ball field, battlefield, boardroom, or breakfast table. And guys and gals will sit back and go, hey, my son scored a goal in 2 nights ago. Like, it's a win, right? And especially when you stare evil in the face every day, you got to count the wins. And with a community that's really hard on itself, we're naturally going to count the losses. I had a great, he's a legendary Arkansas coach, Dick Bumpus, lives up there in Beaver Lake, right? He was my defensive coordinator at the Naval Academy, and he was really good. He was intentional about showing us good plays. Because at a service academy, you have a bunch of guys that are really hard on themselves. Like, they don't need any help feeling driven and how to get better. And I remember Coach Bumpus would make me watch good plays. And him and Tommy Ray, my linebacker coach, would make me watch good plays, because they know I'd skim over those. Like, the minute the game was over, all I could remember is the bad plays and the things I missed, right? And they would force me to confront the reality that I've made some good plays too. Because feelings are real, but they respect facts. And so you confront your feelings with the fact that you did something well. When you count wins, the body and the brain, the body and the brain are downside risk managers. They're going to make sure you don't die, whatever they do. So they're going to interpret the most negative possible application of that data. So you got to give it irrefutable good data. Wow. And like you've been on one of the things I say is, like, we're going to win the war on suicide with daily wins and a good day's work. And a daily win is like, there's these things. Hey, did someone tell you you're smart? Did someone tell you thank you? Someone tell you you did good job? And it looks like a golf scorecard. And you look at it and you go, okay, I did do something good. I don't even remember what question you asked, but there's this. I can only share my own journey, and I'm very honest and authentic about my journey, right? And I tell people, like, there's a difference between being here and being home. And everyone understands that. There's nothing unique to the veteran experience. Like, what may be different for the veteran and the first responder is when we experience this and how acutely we experience. But everybody goes through this reinvention and recalibration, right? And so for me, there's a difference between being here and being home. Here's geography. Home is knowing why I'm here. And when you don't know why you're here, that's a harder thing. And so I remember I was down at our shoot house down in Dallas, and I said, man, I'm here, and everyone I love who needs me is home. They're on the other side of that door, right? And I got to get home. My wife deserves a husband who's home. My girls deserve a daddy who's home. My friends and teammates deserve a guy who's home. So how do I get from here to home? And I was sitting there looking at the door. I go, C4. And C4 is amazing. You can cook with it. You blow stuff up. C4 is great. But for me, it became an acrostic. And what it stood for is career, compete, contribute, and have a catalyst. Because what I realized in that moment is my career until my early 30s was competing against other athletes, against our nation's enemies. My career contribution was a form of service. And my career demanded that I get better every day, which is a catalyst. So I literally have about 2 years of a journal, and all it says is CCCC, career, and it's ones and zeros because I can't have a good day of work if I don't go to work because I'm either too harsh or too generous. I'm either going to give myself an A or an F. So I know me one of those like ones and zeros. Did you go to work? Did you go to work? It's the only way you can have a good day. So did I go to work? So I've got 2 years of CCCC 1 0 1 1 1 1 1 0 1. Very rarely to have 1 1 1 1. Because I'm not going to give myself the credit, but I'd have them, right? So career, did I go to work? Compete, did I compete in something? Did I train to compete in something? Contribute, did I help someone that can't help me? And catalyst, did I get better? Was I learning a new skill? Was I gaining a proficiency? Was I trying to dribble the ball left-handed? Was I trying to figure out how to play the ukulele? I mean, there's parts of our brains that stay active when we're learning a new skill. And so learning to play the banjo, learning to do something that from a brain science perspective, that's really, really important. It's the physiology of performance, right? That's why Larry Fitzgerald, one of the greatest receivers ever, I think probably by the 6th or 7th year, he stopped really training for football in the off season, and he became a photographer. And he was just going all over the world taking pictures. And what he was doing is he was stoking the fires of creativity in his brain. Because when you become good at something, you become habituated to it. And there's an element of efficiency that can quickly become complacency if you're not careful. So you can optimize so well that everything's efficient, and that's when complacency, almost incidental complacency. So that's why that learning a new skill, because it keeps that part of your brain active. Wow. There's no trigger in the brain for growth based on success. It isn't there. So you can only grow based on struggle or strain. So that gaining a new skill, like trying to write left-handed, right? Small things, but those small things, trying to type, trying to speed read, these little side things, the physiological impact on that is pretty crazy.
Wow. Yeah. So two points, and as far as we've come with science and technology, my grandpa told me to learn something new every day. Every day. My entire time growing up.
Yep.
He was a man ahead of his time.
100%.
So to speak. And then that same conference you
was
were
he a farmer or rancher?
Engineer and a farmer.
Engineers are like that.
Yeah.
Engineers.
I mean, just a brilliant man, greatest man I ever met. But the second thing was, that conference you were speaking about. You and I had a closed session behind the curtain meeting, and one of the things you told me was, "There's something good that's happened in your life today. Find it." Yeah. Because I was in a really dark place, but we've got to have those people in our life that remind us of that. And the culture and the profession has got to change where we have leaders that remind us of that.
And what a great leader will do is remind you. Not like when I go, "Hey, how you doing today?" and guys go, "Prove it." I'm not, and they go, "Good, I'll go prove it." I'm reminding them to count the wins. What do you mean prove it? Well, tell me one good thing happened on the ball field, the battlefield, the boardroom. I should explain that a little bit. Y'all have heard me say this 100 times. One of the questions I get asked all the time, and I know y'all do too, is what's my favorite gun? And like, hey, what's your favorite? Especially when I'm a group full of young men or something like that. And my answer is the one that works. Like, give me the one that works. That's my favorite one, right? But what I always tell them is like, hey, are you asking what my favorite gun is or what my favorite weapon is? And the younger they are, the faster they'll go, it's the same thing. And I go, no. A gun is a tool. A weapon is what I use to win. My favorite weapon is a map. Because once I got the map, I got everything. I know where the bad guy will be. I know what to come in, what to bring, what to leave, how to get home. And if I have a map, the worst I'll ever be is wrong. But I won't be lost. And wrong and lost are different animals, man. I've been wrong and I've been lost. I hate them both. I was an officer, land navigation. We just get lost. It's what we do. I know every former enlisted infantryman, Marine Corps, they're all like, yeah, officers get lost. We got to do our nav course. Then we got to go find the stupid, Naval Academy West Point guy that's just kind of wandered off somewhere, right? But I will take wrong over lost anytime. Because if you're lost, any move could be wrong. But if you're wrong, it's just a matter of realizing it, remembering where you said you want to go, availing yourself to the wisdom of those who've been where you say you want to go, those who are there now, and the camaraderie of those who want to get there as badly as you, and then you just got to do the work. Awesome. And when I describe my life, I've lived on the ball field, the battlefield, the boardroom, and the breakfast table, right? Ball field, athlete, battlefield, member of the military, boardroom, kind of what I do now, breakfast table, my bride and our 3 daughters, right? And we're born onto the breakfast table. That's the map we're on our whole lives, right? And we're born on a breakfast table, and sometimes that's great, and sometimes it's not. And then we build a breakfast table, right? And for me, the ball field is my mental and physical health, and the boardroom is my professional endeavors, and all three are a battlefield. So I describe my life biographically as having been lived on the ball field, the battlefield, the boardroom, and the breakfast table. But I run my life now. I fight my life now. Ball field, mental and physical health. Boardroom, what I'm trying to do, the provision for myself and those entrusted in me. And the breakfast table, Amy and the girls and my family. And all three of them are battlefield. And at best, my everyday enemy is complacency and entropy, at best. At worst, I've got real enemies, real adversaries, right? Yeah. And for me, there's a distinction between an adversary and an enemy. An adversary is a competitor, right? An enemy is an enemy. And I want to beat an adversary. I'm going to crush an enemy, right? There's a different level of heat that an enemy's going to get than an adversary's going to get, right? Because words matter to me, and it helps me. That distinction between enemies and adversaries is, I think, kept me from getting more personal fouls than I did anyway. And but for me, like building maps of my life, and when I say prove it, what I'm asking guys to do is look on one of those maps: mental, physical health, personal, professional. Tell me, because I promise you something good happened in the last 48 hours, and because you're so driven and you're such a good person, sometimes got to remind you of the good because you're just focused on getting better. I have a great friend. He's super talented. And we were talking one time. I said, "Man, you feel guilty, don't you?" And he looked at me and goes, "Yeah." I said, "That's because you're good." He goes, "What?" I was, "Only the good feel guilty." Well, only the good struggle with guilt. So if you feel guilty about anything, there's an inherent goodness in you. Otherwise, you wouldn't feel guilty. Right? Isn't that ironic? So sometimes the good dudes feel guilty and the good gals feel guilty, and you got to, hey, there's data. I'm not saying what you said is bad is good, but I'm saying there's good that you haven't counted, and you got to count them all. Got to count the wins, got to count the losses, and that's data. The brain craves that because the body and the brain are just doing everything they can to keep you alive. So they'll interpret anything that's uncertain is bad because that's how you stay alive, right? The body and the brain are paranoid because that's their job. So you got to confront that self-preservation with data, and then they'll go, "Oh, okay,
Yeah, the data says we're good.
Yeah, data says we're good.
It's not how I feel. Yeah. It's what the
and experience helps us see that over time. Like the first time you hear something, first time you see something, you're like, oh, and then the third time you see it, you're like, okay, I know what that means. And then the trick is the 10th time you see it to still recognize it as a signal, not become diminished. Like in the training world, and again, I'm a words guy, so this is how I see things. I don't like the phrase stress inoculation. The stress, I don't like it, and I prefer stress acclimation. Inoculation to me means you sense it less, you deal with it less. I don't want you having a diminished radar. I just want it to affect you less. I want you to know that the pressure's there, know that the threat's there. I just want you to be able to perform under that pressure, right?
Right.
Because, and again, this is semantics. I'm just telling you how I feel about things. That C4 career it gave me data that helped me realize that I wasn't lost. And I don't like being wrong, but I've been wrong in the past. I'll be wrong again. I just won't be lost.
Yeah.
And the data that y'all are talking about creating and this panel that officers can look at and go, okay, I was wrong, but I'm not lost. And if you're not lost, you got a chance. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the expectation is we're going to be wrong. We know that.
Your name's not Jesus.
Yeah, if you don't realize that,
yeah.
But how you come back from that wrong.
Yeah,
right?
And if you're wrong, just make new mistakes.
Absolutely.
Just be wrong again. When I kind of had that make new mistakes mentality shift, I discovered two things. One, I'm extremely creative with a mistake. I'm convinced that I've made mistakes that no other human has ever made. I'm like, that's a stunningly creative mistake, Clint. But then, two, I just got better over time. Right? And I'm just gonna make new mistakes, right? I'm gonna understand why. That's why we train. Like, hey, we inventory those mistakes, and we understand the circuit. That athlete. Hey, I wonder what I ate on Tuesday. I was so impressed by that. I was so impressed that he wanted to inventory the supply chain of performance a full 24 hours further back. That just reminded him he was in Denver. I'm like, you're at 6,000 feet, right? He was like, oh, maybe it was that. I was like, yeah, Mile High Stadium.
What do you got, brother?
So, man, as soon as I found out you were coming, I had one question I wanted to ask
Yes, sir.
you. We've heard
Beard care, VO5 hot oil. That's my
Hold on, what was that?
VO5 hot oil. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It will not, it will not make your legs any bigger there,
No, it
Bird
won't.
man.
That's right. You got to get
Sorry.
on a squat rack, man. It's just
There you go. Have we not talked about this?
When you don't wear shorts, you don't need to work legs.
skies out, thighs out, man. Skies out, thighs out.
Sir, your real question.
Sorry, let's become professional.
So I've heard the battlefield boardroom, breakfast table. I've heard you speak on it before,
Yeah.
And you've had a lifetime of experience leading high-performing individuals, the Type A's, hard-charging, hard-driven.
Mm-hmm.
We have the opportunity to do the same in law enforcement.
Yeah. And you learn a lot from them while you're doing it.
So, my question is, what have you found? What tools did you use over those years? You know, you got all this drive, but we and them wear so many hats. Boardroom, battlefield,
Buddy.
all that. So
Yeah.
how do you?
Y'all's boardroom is a battlefield.
So what I'm getting at is how do you preach balance? How do you either example balance? How do you balance and pace and all that kind of stuff? Because inevitably, at least in my
Yeah.
past, what I see is they're like levers.
No, I love that question.
You know,
Can I say something real
Yeah,
quick?
yeah.
To that? So I want to brag on Eric for asking that question, but he's asking that question because a big part of what he and his wife do is an after hours outside of the academy family life balance class.
Huge.
And
For
so
law
we
call it PFF, Preservation of the Force and Family.
Yep.
This
And
is
so
a doctrine inside the military.
Eric is pouring into our young men and women at the academies by doing these after-hour classes with his wife.
Yeah.
And so finding that balance and pushing those levers to make it all work.
You don't want to quench the flame. You know, that hard driving.
Man, let me speak to that because I love that, and it's probably one of my favorite questions to answer. One, we have to disassociate ourselves from time when it comes to creating balance, because time is measured absolutely, but is experienced relatively, right? So trying to get 5 minutes with my 5-year-old daughter was super simple, right? Trying to get 5 minutes with my 15-year-old daughter is a different animal, right? But still 5 minutes. The 5 minutes isn't different, but how I've experienced, how I've interpreted experience, right? And so I remember I was with the Arizona Cardinals, and there was a great tight end named Todd Heap, and he was a great football player. I don't think a lot of people appreciate him for what he was, but and Todd, if you're watching this, if I get this somewhat inaccurate, you still look cool, so don't worry about it. And but he was about to become a dad, and he goes, Clint, how do I make sure I'm as good a dad as I am a tight end? And it's one of these questions that you're kind of answering extemporaneously. So you're kind of hearing it for the first time yourself, and you're like, I'm a hypocrite. Like, I'm telling them to do this, but I don't do it. You're only a hypocrite if you lie about it. But if you're experiencing it in real time and you're honest about it, it's not a big deal. I said, what are the reps? And he goes, what do you mean? I said, well, there's these reps in our craft that we iterated and then we came together to perform under time. So there's there's the whole 10,000 repetition thing. And I like the 10,000 repetition rule. I think it's a pretty good one. The problem is we typically don't apply it to the ball field, on the battlefield, in the boardroom. We don't apply it to the breakfast table. And I said, what are the reps of being a good dad, right? And so I remember, I'll tell you how much it hurt. So I was sitting there, I was flying home. I was like, all right, I'm going to get 10,000 reps in being a good husband, being a good daddy. And I went to my bride and I said, hey, babe, I want to be an elite husband. I'm going to do 10,000 things an elite husband does. And I don't think I've done 10,000 things. And she said, you haven't. I'm like, hold on. I wasn't asking you. I was saying perhaps maybe, right? I was like,
quick of a response.
But I said, I was like, yeah, I'm going to get 10,000. And here, my list only have 5. My list will never have more than 5 things because this has got to do this, right? Okay. So I only have lists of 5. It's important I got 5 lists. And I said, here's 5 things I'm going to do that an elite husband does. I'm going to take you on a trip. I'm going to do all these things. And she kind of, I mean, who doesn't want to hear that as a spouse, right? And she goes, these are for me. And I said, yeah. And she goes, should I tell you what they are? I'm like, probably makes a lot of sense.
Might be better.
She goes, listen, I'd love to go on a trip once a quarter, but like, can you not be a jackass when you come home from work? I'm like, don't be. I was like, yeah, that's way cheaper. That's way cheaper than a trip. But she gave me these 5 very achievable things. And then
that is gold.
But here's how it is. And for me, it became like going to the gym. Like, I've got it. Chris has seen this. It is on the very opening of my phone. I've got a counter. And I have reps. I have reps with my daughters.
That's your home.
This is my faith. This is if it's important to me, it's on here. And I've flipped these counters so many times. And I learned the currency of my daughters. Currency isn't money. Currency is the value proposition upon which you make decisions, right? And my job as a leader is to understand the currency of the person that has been entrusted to me. And I got to learn that currency, and I get those reps in it. And so, like for me, and if my wife's mad at me, I'm like, I'll look at it, I was like, well, I've gotten a rep in like 4 days. Like, no wonder. But for me, that's a familiar. Like, if I want to get stronger, I go to the gym. What do? I get reps and squats. Squats and deadlifts, right? If I want to, but my deal.
Just say forearms and taps.
Yeah. But my deal, I'm very familiar with that. I'm infinitely familiar to rep progression towards proficiency. And so all I did is I took that discipline that I gained on the ball field and I pulled it over into the breakfast table, and it works. And the liberating part of this is you can disassociate it from time. When we think in balance, we think, hey, I got to give each kid 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to give each kid 5 minutes. You got to give each kid a rep in what matters to them, and you got to learn what that rep is. And what you'll find is you always have time to cultivate balance in the relationships that matter most.
That is
because you're liberated from time.
That is.
It's not a time thing.
I have never heard what you've just said before.
Yeah.
That's
Dude, that's good.
No, but what it does is it points out our failures. One of the things when we talk to these young men and women or
well, it's not a failure. It's just a new way to look at it.
Well, no, because it is a failure because we didn't put in the reps on the other side of the house.
Yeah.
Put in the reps in the shoot house, on the range, on the traffic stops, the professional side of our house, right? The battlefield and the ball field, but failed at the
So this is
level.
evidence of your goodness because you're feeling guilt for a performance system that you only just got introduced to. It's like learning Chinese. Like, man, I should have learned Chinese when I was 2. I'm like, no, you should have learned English when you were 2. So, like, good people have this, like, retroactive application of guilt. Like, we hold ourselves responsible. We hold ourselves responsible for the thing we just learned that we should have been doing our whole lives, but no one invented it. I should have been driving an electric car my whole life, right? And which, by the way, is incredibly stressful because I rented one in D.C. on accident. I wasn't paying attention. And I asked the lady, like, hey, how many miles does this thing get? She's like, 240. I'm like, is that calculated on a 5'8", 165-pound male? Because I'm about to blow that out of the water. Like this, we need to figure out an exchange system because the math may be off on this one, right? And it was terrifying. It was most stressful. But the point is, like, you can craft balance into your life, especially relational balance, when you just understand what the currency is.
I love the 10,000 reps because I've read the book, love the principle, never thought to apply it or to condense the reps down to
But
to
I
5
didn't either
things.
until Todd Heap asked me the question. Yeah. And that's why I keep telling him, like, hey, my name's not Jesus. I'm not going to get this. I'm just going to make new mistakes, though. And so once I realize I've made a mistake, I don't absolve myself of wishing I would have done it better, but also I don't beat myself up for something I didn't know how to do, right?
Can I ask you a question to follow up here? Because now I'm intrigued by this.
Yeah.
Because I've never done it. I've always tried to do what I thought they needed as opposed to ask. What a simple thought. But how often do you ask that question and modify that list?
Update it.
I try to do it annually. We try to do it annually.
Okay.
And what I try to do, and I either do it directly or I just kind of interpret it or ask, right? Like kind of, because my daughter's getting to know themselves, right? So I just kind of discern something, right? But what I try to do now is I try to get 3 from the person and then 2 that I just, because I want to love you the way I want to love you too, right? Yeah. Like I'm not a robot, right? And so, but it's always 5, and I can sit there and I can look at the relationships that I have that are struggling right now, and I hate knowing I can do better, but not knowing how, and I'm used to, like, I had to be good in the weight room because I wasn't showing up with the natural gifts a lot of other guys had, right? So for me, what's interesting about the body and the brain is how quickly my body and my brain accepted that as a performance system. And the reason my body and my brain accepted that quickly as a performance system is because it's done it its whole life on the ball field. And so exporting these proven practices from one terrain to the next is very seamless. Having that, squat, deadlift, bench, that the Boyd Epley, Nebraska off-season program, mm-hmm. I didn't know that was going to help me at the breakfast table, but I learned how to put myself under load and gain skill through reps on the ball field, right? So I tell people, it's like, Hey, you just didn't. It's not that you didn't know or you didn't care. You just didn't know it worked over here too, right?
Wow.
How important is it? Because what I'm hearing is, 5, right?
Yeah.
5. Let's not overcomplicate
Well, listen, there's
No.
some limitations coming with this
Well,
cat right
I
here.
get it. I get it. I mean-
Y'all can do more than I can. I was like,
I'm from Western Arkansas
yeah.
too, buddy. But there's value in simplicity, is there not?
Simple's the only thing to remember when you're scared, stressing over
Right.
your skis. And I spend a lot of my time scared, stressing over my skis, so I
Yep.
got to keep it simple.
I think that's something that we don't take into consideration. We want to overcomplicate, the problem. The problem's usually overcomplicated, or we overcomplicate it, and then the solution. Yeah. And I think if we took a more simplistic approach to a lot of these issues that we're talking about, whatever they may be, whether it's the ball field, the battlefield, or the breakfast table, we're going to have a clearer outcome.
Well, I also think, listen, I think one of the better analogies that people can have is like you're a ship at sea. The ocean always has a vote. You can do everything right, and it can still go wrong because the ocean is undefeated. That's why I love water sports. Water sports they're so consistent with what life really is. Like the water always wins. The water is undefeated, and Michael Phelps is just the fastest person on the planet at not dying in the water. He's doesn't die in the water real quick because the water has its rules, and you got to abide by them, right? And the water imposes humility on us, and I think that's one of the things we have in the SEAL teams is we recognize our limitations and our the reality of our existence because the water's going to win. The best we can do is come up with a gentleman's agreement with the water that day, right? And so my deal is it's this constant learning. When you're navigating a ship, no one ever goes point A to point B when you're on a ship, right? What happens is you know what B is, and you do this the whole way. And you measure the whole way because the ocean's pushing this way and the winds are pushing this way. And when we recognize our humanity and our limitations in this environment that we're in, and we create these systems to help us understand where we are and how to track back towards it, it's not that we're being gentle with ourselves, we're just being more honest with ourselves. I'm not saying be easy on yourself. I'm saying being honest with yourself. They're just, and the problem with guys and gals like us is we feel like anything but being hard on ourselves is being easy on ourselves. And that's not the truth. You have being easy on yourself, don't do that. You have being honest with yourself, do that. And then you have being hard on yourself. So I'm saying is be honest with yourself. Yeah. Hey, how you doing today? Good. Prove it. What do you mean? Tell me something that good that happened on the ball field. Did you get a PR on the bench, or did you? And all of a sudden the brain's like, oh yeah, wow. And it's just data. It's just driving that data and creating a framework that allows us to see the data because you can't argue with data.
I'm stealing that one today, by the way.
Yeah, I stole it from somebody. I don't know who, but I was like,
Yeah.
Solomon says it. Nothing new under the sun, right?
That's true. Right. Wow. Man. I'm overwhelmed by some of that.
It's phenomenal.
Well, let's do this more. Listen, you've already heard me say it. I don't need a reason to get out of Dallas. I'll come up here anytime, and my daughters are getting old enough. These boys are starting to like them, so I'll just cruise up there and stare at them. Well, I took my oldest daughter up to Fayetteville. I took daughter 1 up to Fayetteville, and I took daughter 3 up there to see her when she was a freshman. So daughter 1, daughter 3 were taking a nap, and I was just walking around the campus. And then daughter 1 calls. She's like, Dad. I go, what? She goes, where are you? I'm like, I just walk around campus. She goes, where are you right now? I'm like, I'm walking around campus. She goes, my friends called me and said you're just standing in front of the fraternity houses staring at people. I'm like, yeah, well, only the boys with bad ideas are worried about it. Like the ones that got no bad plans, they're fine. It's these little guys that are like, they need to be stared at. That's what she's like, come at. I was like, whatever. I'm gonna finish staring at this guy real quick, and got to pee on the tree a little bit. Right?
Chris, I think
he's working that beat button like a
So, our goal number 1 is to lead, not follow in this profession
every day,
and to change this culture.
Yeah.
And man, I write down a lot about you as legacy because I don't think you realize what your legacy is. That a random meeting at 5 a.m.
on the side of a road during a thunderstorm, and I was wearing flip flops.
In flip-flops and shorts.
Yeah, it's like he looks like he just came out of the woods.
The impact you have made, and the impact you have made on us, and through him, we quote you a lot. I have shared your videos with numerous people. We talk about you because I think we're at that point in law enforcement that we're going to change the culture, and we're going to make a difference. And it's because of legacies and leadership that we're able to go, okay, guess what, folks? We're going to start checking on somebody's headspace.
And let me encourage y'all with this real quick. I don't want to say his name, and he had no issues with this. I just haven't asked him if I could. I'm really respect, but he might be the best combat leader I've ever known in my entire life, right? And I remember saying something about leadership, and he kind of looked at me and he goes, "Hey, Clint, I'm just a little less lost than you." And it didn't diminish, or it just let me know he's human and he needed me, man. And when my leader told me he was human and he needed me, and he recognized that leadership is this imperfect science, and I know his name's not Jesus, and he never said it was, so I don't expect it. But when he just looked at me, and there's this casualness where it's like, man, I'm just a little bit less than lost than you. It made me want to work harder for him, and it made me feel like I could be him one day, right? And
Wow.
But it took some real courage for this. I mean, he had a credibility that was, I'm not going to say unimpeachable, because all of us can fall, right? But it was so neat to see the casualness and ease with which he said, like, "Hey, buddy, I'm just a little less lost than you because I've been doing this a little longer." And I was like, oh. And again, it just didn't. It did nothing to diminish. If anything, it cemented him as the kind of leader I wanted to be like.
Wow.
You know, "Hey, bud, I'm just a little bit less lost than you because I've been doing this longer." And there's this kind of self-effacing, and there was a confidence, he said, with it. It wasn't expressed as a vulnerability, right? You know, Ray Lewis was gifted at making new mistakes. And you listen to him talk about his, Ed Reed. You know, if you go back and you watch the NFL Top 100, it's really fascinating. Every one of those athletes that are the best football players we've ever had, one of the first things they'll tell you is how much they studied. And Deion, fascinating, man. Like, there's a picture of Deion Sanders at Atlanta Falcons where, and the famous part of the picture is he's wearing these boxer shorts with dollar signs on it, right? And that's what everybody sees. What nobody sees is he had bought one of the very first mobile VHS tape players, and it was on his lap, and he was studying game film 5 minutes before he walked out on the field. And so, passion, talent, precision, endurance, right? And then another great story about him is he says it so casually. He goes, "I didn't study wide receivers. I studied coordinators. Receivers come and go. When I understand the tendencies of the coordinator, so Deion was playing chess." And there's this great story about Ed Reed. Bill Belichick says it's the greatest play he's ever seen a safety make. And there's this. You know, Peyton Manning was voracious in his film study, like him and Tom Brady. Like, you just weren't going to out-prepare him. One of my best friends, his name is Beef. You've met him. His name's not Beef. That's just what we call him. But he was extremely successful Navy SEAL, and one of my teammates from the football program at Navy. And you just weren't going to out-prepare him. And there's a story where Ed Reed had studied Peyton Manning so much that he knew there was going to be this one play where all safeties always do this. And so Ed Reed knew that Peyton thought he was going to do that. So he started to do that. Then he comes back around and makes this interception. And to this day, Peyton Manning gets mad at it, right? And all these guys are the best guys in the world, but they're telling you how much they study their craft. And they were also one of the first guys. I remember watching this video. It was the first time I saw it. Remember Roger Craig, great running back for the San Francisco 49ers? I remember watching this, and Roger Craig had a post-game recovery practice. And it showed him going to the chiropractor, and it showed him going to the massage therapist. And no one questioned him as one of the most violent and capable runners. But I saw these guys focus on recovery, right? They were treating the machine. You know?
Wow.
But listen, I'll come back up here. I love this. I'm passionate about first responders and law enforcement, and I don't know how y'all do what y'all do. Like, I'm a method actor. I was put in a position where I could ascend into a character and inhabit that character for the duration of my deployment, right? You know, I get on a plane, kiss my wife, get on a plane, and I become a guy, and I stay that guy until I come back home, right? I didn't have to drop my kid off at school, become that guy, come out of that guy, and then go coach soccer practice. I just don't know how you do it. It's fast. It's unbelievable to me that you guys do it and gals, and you do it so well, right? And I just tell you right now, I won't speak for every veteran or every active. I just never would have gone overseas if there weren't brave men and women willing to take care of my family when I was gone. Just wouldn't have done it. It would have been irresponsible for me. But I remember right after 9/11 happened, I was already over, and we pivoted right over to the Middle East. And I got phone calls from my friends that had become law enforcement officers. And they told my wife, they're like, tell Clint we're in front of his mom's house. And they were just letting me know, like, hey, go, we got it. And for me, this is an opportunity to say thank you. And I don't want this to be the only time I get to do it. So we can, you let me know when you want to be back up here.
Absolutely. Yeah. So
Honor.
you're going to have a spot on the couch anytime you want it. And we do have some things to talk about in the future because we're working on some things with the foundation.
Yeah,
So we're excited about that.
That's going to be neat.
Probably announcing that very soon,
be
and that's
neat.
going to open up doors across the state that have just literally been closed for one reason or the other. But why don't we wrap up with this? So all
Did
four
we
of-
talk about what y'all want to talk about? I feel like a pastor and the Holy Spirit got a hold of me. Like,
Oh, no,
I
no.
got the hanky. And
No, absolutely. So this is our
everyone's
senior
like,
pastor
"I should
for
have brought my
14,000
sack lunch,
officers
man.
across
Sack
the state.
lunch." Yeah.
So
One of them
we
sack lunch Sundays.
nearly every conversation we have with law enforcement across the state, we talk about the 5 outcomes.
Yeah, bad, average, good, excellent.
Absolutely. And so our goal is to reset our baseline every day
Yeah.
to excellence.
Yeah.
And so, first of all, thank you for those 5 outcomes because we use them every
And remember,
day.
Elita's is mythical ridgeline.
I know.
Elita's Camelot. Like I tell people, like the reality is about being tribal and being elite is you can almost only ascend into those states when there's an outside agent, right? Like you become a tribe when you have an enemy at the gate. You ascend into being elite because circumstances demand it so. So existing somewhere between excellent and elite is how we're supposed to live. Because you're not tribal all the time, you're not elite all the time. Because that's that performance. It's like the apex predator.
Yeah.
Like that's why the Shark Week is boring. You're like, look at that. Oh God. Like it's the shark looks lazy until it's coming at you. You're like, oh, that's the scariest thing I've ever seen in my entire life, right? So it's this constant dance of understanding the baseline, optimizing, harvesting energy advantage, ascending into that tribal elite version of yourself, then coming out of it so you can sustain this over time, right?
That's good. Wow.
Well, that's what we're trying to do is we're trying to put tools in the toolbox,
Yeah.
right, to allow the men and women across the state that serve the great citizens of Arkansas the ability to come into the profession, have the tools to succeed, reset their baseline to excellent,
Yeah.
knowing that we're not going to accept bad, average, and good.
Yeah.
It's just not good enough.
Yeah.
And then every once in a while, we're going to hit that elite status, and phenomenal things are going to happen in our profession when we achieve those goals.
Yeah. I was telling my daughter this.
Part of your legacy, by the way.
Well,
so
man.
those 5 outcomes are being spread across the state.
I tell my daughters, like, when you don't know what to do, just do what you think pisses the devil off. And then they just piss the devil off. Like, what's the photo negative? What does the devil want me to do right now? Don't want me to pray, so I'm going to pray. Like, spiting the devil's not the leading strategy in my faith, but when I don't know what to do, just what's going to make him angry. and I tell you this, like, the bad guys want you to be good at best. Like, they'd love for you to be average. They're going to try to make you bad. So if you want to piss the bad guy off, be excellent and be ready to be elite. Hey,
I'm cutting
this
this
out.
out.
Man.
No,
Playing
that-
it from now on.
No, so
all
so
I'm
go,
gonna do,
go
like, if
back.
I don't know what to do today, I'm like, what does the bad guy not want me to do? I'm
So-
gonna do that.
Go back to the debrief. We debriefed a critical incident with 2 young officers
Yeah.
named Alex and Nick.
Yeah.
And bad guy was committed to killing them.
Yeah.
I mean, traffic stop, routine thing we do
Yep.
thousands of times during our career, done it 1,000 times. And you talk about excellent. Man, I'm going to show you that video. We
Yeah.
debriefed them. We're playing that episode in January. But yeah, aggravated the bad guy.
Amen.
Them being excellent. Honestly, I think there were points of that where they achieved.
There were
eliteness.
moments they achieved elite. Sir.
You know.
The enemy was at the gate on, and they responded.
Yeah.
And that's the job. Is like you never know. I tell you, like there's in Crete. If you could talk to any Nazi general and ask them why they lost, they probably wouldn't tell you the Allies. What they would tell you is Crete. Crete is why they lost. Because Hitler was trying to repurpose his troops and get up into Russia and fight. And you're always fighting 2 people in Russia. You're fighting Russia and the Russian winter. And you might be Russia, but you're not beating the Russian winter. Mm-hmm. And so here's this little island called Crete. And so they invaded Crete, but they never occupied it. And the reason they never occupied Crete is the seat of heroism. It's where Hercules was born. But the Cretan definition of heroism is one I've always subscribed to. And what the Cretan definition of heroism is, be of magnificent use to those who need you when they need you most, with who you are already. So it's not becoming this Chris Hemsworth looking dude, right? It's like, hey, what did God give me? How do I use that to its fullest potential right now in this moment? It's like the great quote, do what you can where you are with what you have, and we'll win. And that's heroic. What is heroic is doing what you can where you are with what you have, and being ready for the moment, even if the moment never comes. That's excellent. Excellent is being ready.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
Well,
I
I think
love
we
this,
probably
man.
went longer than anybody anticipated. Just a shout out to Jonathan Nettles for our producer
Hey, if
putting
you
all
got
this
like
together.
if you got like a thinning lens, that'd be, I was gonna wear a dark color, but I was like, nah, that's not honest.
But what a great setup and the ability to do this. Again, thanks to the governor, just allowing us to serve in these positions. What an honor. What an honor to get to pour into a profession that we all love. And thank you for being here today.
Hey man, all these officers and deputies are just worth it, man. It's easy to do stuff that's worth it, right? Like, pointing these young men and women and older men and women, and just like, hey, I want to be the good thing that happened today, and I want to be I wanted to be the one. I want to be the remind you that what you did today was worth it, and who you already are is worth it. So let's just get better.
Well, I'm excited about the future, and like I said, very shortly we'll be announcing some partnerships with the foundation.
I just made him flinch. I yelled at him. My wife said I just Clinting it. You just Clinting that. He broke out his ears.
All right. Well, let's wrap it up, guys. I appreciate
Thank y'all.
everybody
Thanks for the
today. Thank y'all
opportunity.
very much.
I'll be back.
And hey, 10-8 means in service, and just because we're going off the air doesn't mean we're out of service. We're always here for you. So appreciate you guys very much. Thank you.